It was around 3 in the morning when the company radio crackled in a different way. The kind of call that cuts through the silence of the early morning like a razor. Active fire. Structure compromised. Suspected victim inside the residence. The team didn't even blink. In less than 2 minutes, the truck was already cutting through the streets wet with the fine drizzle that was falling, lit only by the headlights and the red lights reflecting off the unlit buildings. The city was asleep. But something in that house, that night, was too awake. Arriving at the scene was eerie. An old house, with no neighbors nearby, was engulfed in flames, but in an irregular pattern. The flames seemed strongest in the back, as if they had started there. No cars in the garage. No windows open. No sign of escape. And the silence was too heavy. "Let's go in. Carefully. There's someone in there, I can feel it," said Kaio, the youngest member of the team, breathing quickly under his mask. The heat was unbearable. The structure creaked as if screaming for help. Inside, the smoke made everything indistinct. But then, in the corner of a dark, charred room, a tiny silhouette appeared among the rubble. It was a child. Property. Small. Barefoot. Kaio ran. The ground threatened to give way beneath his feet. He knelt down, pulled the child into his arms, covered her face with his own oxygen equipment, and shouted into the radio. "I have a victim. Child. Unconscious. I need to get out now." The escape was chaotic. One of the floors partially collapsed as they were leaving. But Kaio got out first, and in his arms he carried what seemed to be just another victim among many. But when the child's eyes opened, for a second, right there on the sidewalk, surrounded by smoke and ambulances and screams, something in them froze the firefighter. It was a look he had seen before. A look that belonged to someone he never expected to meet again. The day before the fire started like any other at the fire station. It was one of those slow mornings, with no major calls. The coffee was strong, the bread was stale as usual, and the conversation in the mess hall revolved around inside jokes and repeated stories. To those who watch from the outside, the routine of the firefighters may seem calm, but inside, everyone knows, the silence is just a truce, and it never lasts long. Sergeant Daniel arrived early, as usual. He was the oldest man on the base, with almost 20 years of service and scars that went beyond his skin. Respected, focused, tough. But there was a heavy air that followed him, something that not even time could erase. Everyone knew, but no one spoke. Daniel lost his son 9 years ago, in a disappearance that never received a response. "Any news about your boy?" asked Lieutenant Marcos, lowering his tone, with the caution of someone treading on minefield. Daniel shook his head, as he always did. "No. But I feel like he's out there. Somewhere." The mood was heavy. Kaio, the youngest on the team, looked away. He never had the courage to ask more questions. He only knew that the boy was 3 years old when he disappeared. He disappeared without a trace. And that had changed Daniel. He didn't talk about it much, but he never forgot either. Later, during physical training, Daniel climbed the simulation tower with the same grip he always had. It was almost as if he wanted to punish himself for the past, as if each exercise was a way to keep himself ready, even if the call never came. But the call came. At 2:53 a.m., the siren rang. There was a fire in an isolated house in the West Zone. A possible victim was inside. The information was vague, but the risk was high. Within minutes, the team was ready. No one spoke. Everyone dressed their clothes as if preparing for the unknown. On the way, the radio started to interfere. Tension spread through the cabin. Daniel looked out the window, as if something that night told him it would be different. Kaio noticed. "Are you feeling that too?" Daniel didn't answer. He just nodded, looking straight ahead. Today, something is wrong. And they didn't know it yet. That night was going to change everything. The smoke was so thick that even with the truck's headlights on full beam, It was difficult to see the front of the house. The structure looked as if it had been swallowed from the inside, as if the fire had started in its bowels. The windows were exploding one by one, and the roof was already caving in on the sides. Kaio was the first to get out of the truck. Daniel came right behind, followed by the others. In a matter of seconds, the team set up the hose lines, activated the hydrants, and organized the perimeter. But what caught everyone's attention was the strangeness of the place. No one around, no cars, no sign of movement. It was as if the house had been abandoned for a long time, but the fire said otherwise. Someone might be in there. This fire isn't short-term, it's been going on for a while. Daniel shouted, analyzing the heat coming from the left side. The team split into two groups. Kaio and Daniel entered through the back, where the flames seemed more intense. The heat made the equipment shake. The internal structure was already compromised, creaking as if it was about to collapse. Even so, they continued. Kaio, focus. No heroism. If you feel like you're going to give in, back off. Understood, Sergeant. As he made his way through the destroyed rooms, Caius heard a sound, a faint, muffled, barely audible sound, like a gasp, a sigh. He turned down the hallway to the right and saw a small figure lying next to a staircase leading to the basement. He didn't seem to be moving. "I've got someone here," he shouted into the radio. "Child. She seems unconscious." Daniel ran. Kaio was already kneeling beside the small body. It was a boy, apparently between 10 and 12 years old. He was dirty, with slightly charred skin, but alive. He was breathing with difficulty. His face, despite being injured, had striking features. Instinctively, Kaio took off his own mask and put it on the boy, even though he knew that this was not protocol. "Breathe, kid. Hold on tight. We're going to get you out of here." Daniel helped lift him carefully. As they carried him, a beam collapsed a few feet away. There was no more time. The house was beginning to crumble. As they ran outside, the tension was absurd. Each step could be their last. Kaio slipped and almost fell with the boy in his arms. Daniel grabbed him by the vest and pulled him hard. "Don't let go of him. Come on now." As they walked through the front door, the team surrounded them. Rescue was immediate. The ambulance was already in position. Kaio handed the child over in a hurry, his chest heaving, his clothes soaked with sweat and smoke. The boy opened his eyes, just for a second. Daniel froze. That look. He knew that look. "But I didn't say anything. Not yet." The boy was rushed to the city hospital. He had minor burns on his hands and legs, dehydration, and clear signs of prolonged exposure to heat. Despite this, doctors said he was strong and had a good chance of recovery. Meanwhile, in the barracks, the atmosphere was restless. Kaio could barely concentrate. He kept repeating the same thing in a low voice, as if trying to convince himself. That look. There was something strange about it. Daniel, on the other hand, was silent. He hadn't spoken a word since they returned. He just stared into space, as if his mind was stuck in a distant, inaccessible spot. "Until almost dawn," he said. "I need to see this boy." Kaio's eyes widened. "What?" "I need to look at him again. Up close. I need to know." That same afternoon, the two went to the hospital. The boy was still unconscious, under light sedation, and being monitored in an isolated room as a precaution. A police officer was at the door, but allowed entry as soon as the firefighters identified themselves. When Daniel walked in, time seemed to freeze. He walked slowly to the bed, stood beside the gurney, and looked at the boy's face. And then he saw it. The scar. A small birthmark on the side of the neck, in the shape of a half-moon. Exactly the same as your son's. Daniel's heart raced. He staggered back, holding on to the edge of the bed to keep from falling. "It's not possible. It can't be." Kaio saw the reaction. "Sergeant, are you okay?" Daniel took a while to respond. He took a deep breath. He looked again. "It's him. My son. It's Davi." Kaio was in shock. "But, the boy disappeared, 9 years ago? That doesn't make sense." Daniel didn't blink. He was in a trance. "I would recognize that look even in the dark. And that mark, It's no coincidence. Shortly after, doctors confirmed what already seemed strange. The boy had no identification. No documents. No registered name. No school records. No medical records. It was as if he didn't exist. The authorities began to investigate. The only clue was the address of the fire, an old house with no registered owner. But Daniel no longer cared about that. He was obsessed. For the first time in years, he felt hope. And also fear. Fear of being right. Fear of being wrong. Fear of finding out what really happened to your child. And deep down, something worried him even more. If that boy really was David, where has he been all this time? And why has he appeared now? In the days that followed, there was a feeling that something was about to be resolved. The team remained respectfully silent. The case was already circulating behind the scenes at the corporation, but no one dared to talk directly to Daniel. Everyone knew the pain he was carrying and the almost impossible chance that now appeared before his eyes, like a miracle. Daniel spent most of his time in the hospital. He sat by the bedside, holding the boy's hand, and telling stories about when David was little. The boy was still unable to speak. He was in shock, according to the doctors, but he was already opening his eyes, observing and listening. And every now and then, he would squeeze Daniel's hand in response. On the third night, Daniel brought an old photo. A picture of little David playing with a toy fire truck. He placed it on the table next to the bed. When the boy saw it, his eyes filled with tears. He didn't say anything, but he looked away, as if the memory hurt. That was enough for Daniel. It's him. I have no more doubts. With the lieutenant's informal support, Daniel managed to have a DNA sample collected discreetly. It was the safest way to confirm everything without triggering too much bureaucracy and attracting unwanted attention. The next morning, Daniel woke up with something different in his chest, real hope. The first in almost a decade. Today could be the day my life gets back on track, he told Caius. I just need the results. But hope doesn't last long in stories like this. In the early afternoon, he arrived at the hospital as usual. He greeted the security guards, went through reception, and picked up his visitor's badge. It went up. When he arrived on the pediatrics floor, he noticed strange movement. A group of nurses were murmuring in the hallway. The room where the child was empty. No stretcher, no equipment, no monitor. Daniel ran to the infirmary. Where's the boy? My boy. The on-call officer turned pale. He was transferred. They said it was an order from the administration. A social worker showed up with documents. Daniel punched the wall. What social worker? What documents? There was no record. No input into the system. No formal output. Internal cameras. They were off that afternoon, for maintenance. The boy had simply disappeared again. Daniel collapsed to the floor, his eyes fixed on the empty bedroom door. Caio arrived soon after, trying to understand what was happening. Daniel couldn't speak. He just held the old photo against his chest and repeated, almost in a whisper, "Not again, not again." Hope was now despair. That night, the barracks didn't see Daniel. He didn't return to his barracks. He didn't answer his cell phone. He didn't answer the radio. But Caio knew where to find him. The sergeant's car was parked in front of the house where it all began, now reduced to ashes and charred pieces. He was standing there in the dark, staring into space. The smoke had already cleared, but the smell still permeated the air. And Daniel, with his eyes fixed on nothing, seemed to be talking to ghosts. "They took him again, Caio. And this time, I won't accept it silently." Caio tried to speak, but Daniel cut him off. "Did you know that the shelter where he was adopted never gave me a concrete answer? That he disappeared months after he disappeared? Do you think there is a connection?" Daniel nodded, his jaw clenched. "I don't think so. I know." The same name of the social worker who showed up at the hospital today was mentioned in the investigation into Davi's disappearance 9 years ago. That was the missing spark. The next day, Daniel went straight to the old detective who had worked on the case. The man was already retired and tired, but when he heard the details, his old instincts returned. He cross-referenced names, dates, adoption records, and foster homes. What they discovered was terrifying: a web of ghost shelters used to wash records of homeless children. Children who disappeared from the system and turned up months later in other states, other families, or simply never showed up again. David was one of those children. The name of the woman who signed the transfer at the hospital has appeared in 3 other missing child cases, all unsolved. Daniel exploded. This is no coincidence. It's a crime. And I'm going to find out who's behind this, even if I have to do it alone. He tried to use legal channels. He was ignored. Protocols. Lack of concrete evidence. Court order required. Nothing that resolved the issue with the urgency he needed. So, Daniel decided he wasn't going to wait any longer. If the system wants to pretend it doesn't see, I'll go after it myself. Kaio hesitated, but he went along. They got a list of the last addresses associated with the social worker and began their own search. They questioned people, pressured government officials, and knocked on doors. A pattern began to emerge. The children were being taken to supposed temporary care centers, all of which were closed or non-existent. The trail took them to a remote farm on the outskirts of the city, registered in the name of an inactive NGO. There was recent movement there. Daniel looked at the rusty gate. His hand was shaking with anger, fear, adrenaline. But the eyes were steady. If David is here, I won't come back without him. That moment sealed everything. There was no turning back. No forgiveness. No patience. Only the truth. And whatever had to be destroyed for her to appear. The entrance to the farm was surrounded by tall bushes, and the outside lights were off. But from the main shed, a window let out a sliver of yellowish light. Daniel and Kaio got out of the car cautiously. The detective had obtained a copy of the site plan years ago, when the NGO was still operating legally. But now, it was something else. They approached from the back. The side gate was locked with an old padlock. Daniel broke it open with an iron bar he had brought in the car. They entered. Inside, there was total silence. Kaio turned the flashlight on low. On the floor, there were open cardboard boxes, scattered folders, and some partially burned papers. But, at the back of the room, behind a locked door, they heard something. Steps. Weak. Unbalanced. Daniel broke down the door. Inside, drugged, lying on an old mattress and without a blanket, was the same boy he had rescued from the fire. David. His eyes were open, but empty, as if he had recently been medicated. Daniel ran to him. David. Son. It's me, Daddy's here. The boy took a while to react, but he moved his lips. He didn't speak. He just looked. And in that look, Daniel was sure, it was him. There was no more doubt. But before they could leave, the sound of a car came from outside. Kaio ran to the window. Damn. There are more people coming. They are armed. Daniel stood up, with David on his lap. We're going to get out of here. Even if I die for it. They went down a side hallway and tried to exit through the back, but the gate was locked from the inside with a thick chain. There was no time. Kaio pointed to a partially damaged side wall. There. We can break through and get out through the back lot. Daniel carefully leaned against David, picked up an iron bar and began to break down the structure. Go, Kaio. Try the other side. But before they could clear enough space, 2 armed men burst through the front door. Nobody move. Daniel stood between the men and his son. If you want to kill me, do it. But he gets out of here. Time has stopped. Suddenly, sirens. Police. The parallel investigation carried out by the detective, together with the anonymous sending of the documents found at the NGO, had had an effect. Vehicles invaded the land in seconds. Shots in the air. The criminals tried to escape. One of them was arrested. Another managed to escape through the forest. Daniel, in shock, fell to his knees on the floor, with his son in his arms, as police officers took over the scene. The detective approached, panting. It worked, Daniel. You found him. Daniel looked up at the sky. His eyes were watery. David, for the first time, whispered, "Okay." The world stopped at that moment. The entire city came to a standstill in the following days. News spread quickly. A firefighter sergeant had been reunited with his son, who had been missing for nearly a decade, and in the process, helped bring down an illegal adoption ring that operated under the guise of social services. The images of the rescue, the operation, the child involved, were all over the newspapers. But none of that mattered as much as what Daniel felt when he woke up the next morning and saw David sleeping on the living room couch. For the first time in 9 years, his house had life again. David was still fragile. The recovery would be long, emotional and physical. But the boy was there. Alive. Real. And he said, every day, "Dad, tell me more about that story about the toy truck." Daniel smiled. The corporation honored those involved with a discreet ceremony. Kaio received a medal for bravery. Daniel refused decorations. "I just did what any father would do," he said, his eyes filling with tears. But everyone there knew he had gone further. Behind the scenes, the investigation into those involved continued. Several names emerged. Respected people. People with positions. The system had allowed all of this, and Daniel swore he would not let it happen again. But at that moment, he just wanted to rebuild what time had tried to destroy. He took David to his old bedroom, now dusty, but intact. On the bed was the same toy truck from the photo. David looked. He touched it with his fingers, which were dirty with school ink. "Did you save it?" Daniel nodded, his voice breaking. "I never stopped waiting for you." And for the first time, David truly smiled. And then, looking his son in the eyes, Daniel said, "Sparkles, because, in the end, saving a life is saving an entire world."